So, without further ado, let's get to our first guitarist, the Spaceman, okay? On this Memorial Weekend, the Spaceman, Ace Frehley. This video is dedicated to the Spaceman, Ace Frehley, a force in rock history, whose guitar spoke truths that words alone could not. From the Bronx to stadiums around the world, he defied limits, carved his own path, and left an indelible mark on music and all rock fans. Ace wasn't just a member of Kiss. He was the wild spark, the innovator, the one who made every note feel like a promise. He lived loud, unapologetically, and with a fire that will forever resonate. His family shared the news through a statement saying, "We are completely devastated and heartbroken. In his last moments, we were fortunate enough to have been able to surround him with loving, caring, peaceful words, thoughts, prayers, and intentions as he left this earth. We cherish all of his finest memories, his laughter, and celebrate his strength and kindness that he bestowed upon others. The magnitude of his passing is of epic proportions and beyond comprehension. Reflecting on all of his incredible life achievements, Ace's memory will continue to live on forever. Though he's gone, his solos still echo, his spirit still soars, and his legacy will never fade. This is more than a documentary. This is a tribute to a legend and a forever icon. Rock on, Ace, and take that rocket ride." The sound of his guitar playing is unmistakable. The tone, the vibrato, and just the attitude that comes out of the Marshall speakers. It only takes a few seconds, and you know that it is Ace Frehley. In this video here, we're going to talk a little about Ace and his early life, before he ever put the Spaceman makeup on, and try to find out how this rock and roll guitarist came to be, and what drives him and what caused him to walk away from Kiss. He was a New York boy, born and raised in the Bronx. Growing up wasn't easy in his neighborhood. Was he just born to rock, or did the environment he was raised in have something to do with the guitarist he came to be? I think a little of both. When he auditioned for Kiss, Gene, Peter, and Paul knew that Ace was the one almost immediately after only jamming out a few songs. Ace's guitar spoke for him. Ace walked away from Kiss, not once but twice, leaving millions of dollars on the table. That had to be tough, but for Ace, it just might have been harder to stay for the fame and fortune and not listen to his heart. It's probably a good thing he did listen, or he might not have been able to live with it. So let's get on with it and kick back and take a look back on Ace Frehley. Paul Daniel Frehley was born April 27, 1951, and raised in the Bronx, New York City. The youngest of three children, he was, in the truest sense, the black sheep of his family. And if you wonder why, all you gotta do is ask him and he'll tell you. Because all I wanted to be was a rock and roll guitar player, and that didn't go over well with his middle-class family. To be a rock and roll guitarist, it has a little more to do with than just playing the guitar. It comes with an attitude that a lot of people just don't understand. Ace joined up in the street gangs early. He had to for protection. He wasn't really into drugs as a teen, but he did drink, and from what he says, quite a bit. Girls were also one of his main focuses. He got the nickname Ace in high school from his friends, who said he was a real ace for his ability to talk to the girls and get dates. Also in his high school years, a guidance counselor encouraged him to get into graphic arts. He later credited guitar playing for saving his life. Although from all accounts, Ace was a pretty good artist in his day, but the guitar was his main focus. Ace bounced around in different bands, honing his skills, but it was in December of 1972 that Ace would answer an ad in a local paper. He had his mom drive him to the audition. He hauled his Marshall half-stack in her car and unloaded it and took it in. He then set up and played with what was to become the band Kiss. Out of all the guitar players they listened to that day, Ace was it. But let's take a little deeper look inside of this guy and the band. Let's start off with that first Kiss album. And give credit where credit is due, Gene and Paul were very good songwriters. They had spent the last couple of years sitting around and working on most of them songs. They brought in Peter to play drums. Now, Gene and Paul said they were looking for a John Bonham type player. Well, they may have been looking. Even Paul admitted that Peter was the right man for the job. After making a go at it three-piece, they quickly realized that wasn't going to work. So they put out an ad looking for a guitarist. Enter Ace Frehley. He had his mom drive him to the audition. He unloaded his Marshall amp, chugged a beer, and went up to play. We have to remember here, Ace was a very insecure person, especially about his playing. He admits this now. I know it is hard for some of us to understand, but most all players are like that to some extent. And Ace, by his own admission, was really unsure of himself. They ran through a song a couple of times and then told Ace, join in and play. The song was Deuce, and the rest is history. He just fit, Gene Simmons says. 1 minute we had been one thing, and a minute later, with this guy named Ace Frehley, we became something else, something undeniable, Paul Stanley said. Why? Because of the style of music they played. In the beginning, Kiss was a straight-up rock band, and Ace was a straight-up rock and roll player. Even today, Ace still plays just like he did back in the early 70s. And I am sure some of you are not going to agree with me, but I think the first 3 studio albums were much better than anything else they ever did in the studio. Why? A lot of reasons, but the main one is Ace went in there and played from his heart. He just played what he felt. We know Ace was a self-taught rocker. The first 2 albums were both produced by Richie Wise and Kenny Kerner. But that first album, which by the way, most of the songs on there are still some of the most Kiss notables and were basically put together and ready to record. When working these songs out with the band, Ace simply just played. And Gene said, he fit. Okay. The second album, Hotter Than Hell. Again, the same producers, who I think basically just kept things in order on the sessions and let the band play. Remember, Casablanca was just starting out, and Neil Bogart, as always, was trying to make a fast buck. So they probably spent a little more time on this album than the first, but not much. Get in there and rock and get it done. Now, Dressed to Kill, and Neil decides he would produce the album himself, a record executive to produce a rock album. Okay. So again, Kiss probably was basically on their own in the studio and just played from the heart. No major production, just straight up rock and roll. Then came the live album, which was overdubbed quite a bit and produced by Eddie Kramer. Now, Ace was recorded playing on stage, and even when he did overdubs, he was still playing from within himself, also playing what I considered some of the best songs Kiss ever wrote. Now came Destroyer, and enter Bob Ezrin. First off, let me say, Bob Ezrin is a great producer, very talented and musically trained. Ace was nothing more than a self-taught rocker who played from the heart. You getting the picture? All of the members were basically like that, but Ace was different. I think deep inside, he was a rock and roller who, even if he wanted to, could not change. He was the glue that held Kiss together and made them one of the best rock bands ever early in their career, until they took his magic away. Remember, I'm not talking about makeup or stage shows. I'm talking about the music. I became a Kiss fan because of that early music, and I don't believe I was the only one. But for some reason, Gene and Paul decided to let the music change and go more mainstream. And that was a change that Ace and even Peter could not really handle. I think that the Destroyer album and Bob Ezrin was the beginning of the end of what made that band great musically. It took a lot of the heart of Ace Frehley out of the mix. Ace has given Bob Ezrin credit for some of the great music he produced for Kiss and the solos he came up with on the Destroyer album. But if you listen to what little playing Ace did on that album, it does not sound like the Ace we were used to hearing, and in a way, Kiss never did again. You can go and listen to Ace today, and him and whatever his band is sounds great if you are into straight-up rock and roll. Sounds just like he did in the mid-'70s. I would say right around Destroyer is when Ace really started a downward spiral in the band. Of course, Ace had an alcohol problem, and now with all the money and fame, he had a pretty good drug problem going too. Always being the insecure type, and after Destroyer, I'm sure Ezrin telling Ace what to play instead of letting him be himself, and then bringing in studio players didn't help this matter any. Compounded with the fact that Kiss was starting to go ever so slowly off in a different direction musically led to a lot of Ace's problems. Paul and Gene decided to go in a direction that the original Kiss members were not really made for, and to me, the band never was the same again. I think Ace did great solo albums. I really enjoy them. Only a few songs out of all of them were kind of meh. Most were good rock and roll. Sure, he never drawed the crowds that the Kiss band did, but after Ace left, Kiss had to go out of the country to draw crowds like they used to. Ace getting away from Kiss was the best thing for him, in my opinion. That I saw Kiss in the spring of 1974. Outside, during the day, no light show, just four guys playing rock and roll. I was in total awe that day of Ace Frehley. His guitar and Peter's pounding is what drove that band in the early years. When Ace took his solos, you knew it. Not taking anything away from Gene and Paul. Like I said, they were both good songwriters, and without their hard work and ideas, they may never have found a guy like Bill Aucoin that led them to the top. But after that, they lost sight of a big part of what made them, the music. Sure, they went on and became wealthy because they took the name, the idea, and the show. But the music has never been the same to me. Kudos to them for being so successful, but kudos to Ace for keeping to his roots and playing great rock and roll. I think Ace was born to rock. He practiced the rock lifestyle long before he put the makeup on. Once in Kiss, and they turned him loose, he created some great song with them guys. Once they took that away from him, they took a big piece of the band's overall sound away and were never the same. Ace will always be recognized as one of the great rock guitarists, with or without the makeup on. He's left the drugs and booze alone and seems much more low-keyed, although there is nothing about his playing that is low-keyed. Just put a Les Paul in his hand and plug him into a Marshall and get out of his way. So what do you... All right, there you go. Ace Frehley. Rest in peace, spaceman. Welcome on this Memorial Weekend. This is my annual River Docs tribute. I do a little hour show, and don't forget I got another show coming up at 8 o'clock. And I'll be leaving here and going right to that. But we're going to go ahead and move right on into another video. And this gentleman here that I want to remember on Memorial Day. Well, today's not Memorial Day, actually tomorrow. But Memorial Day weekend. Some of you may be watching this tomorrow on Memorial Day. The gentleman we're going to talk with was a founding member of Fleetwood Mac. Many people don't know his name. A lot of people don't know who he is, and I can't believe that. Fleetwood Mac was a total different entity before Rumors and Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. And the gentleman we're going to remember now on Memorial Weekend is Peter Green. A mixture of mind-altering drugs and mental illness was the toxic combination that took Peter Green from the music scene and led him into obscurity. But there was a time when he was right up there on top. Back in the mid-'60s, Eric Clapton was known around the UK as the God. Peter Green was known as the Green God. His warm voice and distinctive guitar playing set in motion the first incarnation of the band Fleetwood Mac to stardom in the United Kingdom. For a time, his guitar playing and songwriting was some of the finest out there. His best-known composition, Black Magic Woman, cracked the charts over in England, then stormed to the top 10 in the United States when Santana covered it. Carlos would always give credit to Peter when performing this song. Yes, there was a time when Peter Green's name was mentioned in the same breath as Eric Clapton, but sadly, I guess it just wasn't meant to be. He was born Peter Allen Greenbaum, October 29, 1946, in Bethnal Green, London, to Jewish couple Joe and Ann Greenbaum. He was the youngest of their 4 children. Peter's interest in music started early on when his older brother taught him a few chords on the guitar at age 10. Peter then took those few chords and started learning the instrument. This would start his love affair with the guitar and music. Early on, his influences were Hank Marvin of the Shadows, and then came the American blues artists such as Muddy Waters and Albert King. Peter was a quick study, and by the time he was 15, he was playing the guitar and the bass guitar in a number of local bands. It was around this time he changed his name to Peter Green and took his first playing job as a bass player in a band called Bobby Dennis and the Dominoes, then moving on to a group called the Muskrats. Sometime in 1965, he filled in for Eric Clapton in John Mayall's Blues Breakers for a few gigs. Later on, he would become a full-time member of the Blues Breakers, but not before hooking up with a group called Peter B's Lunars, who had a tall, lanky drummer working with them named Mick Fleetwood. There's no doubt that Peter was spreading himself around the music scene and making himself known and involved in various different blues and rock and roll tribute bands, but Peter never seemed to stick with the group too long. In 1966, Eric Clapton was to get together with drummer Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and form their own group. But a little before that, he was tiring of the music he was performing with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers and decided to leave to look for greener pastures. So without a guitarist, John Mayall would contact Peter Green, and he would soon join taking Eric Clapton's spot on stage. It was with the Blues Breakers that Peter would record the album and receive critical acclaim for his work on that album, A Hard Road. Already one of the better blues guitarists on the scene, his skills as a songwriter were developing quickly. But again, it wouldn't take Peter long before he was looking for something better, and the next step was to form his own group. Formed in London in 1967, Peter recruited drummer Mick Fleetwood, guitarist and singer Jeremy Spencer, and bassist Bob Brunning, with John McVie replacing Brunning a few weeks after their first public appearance. Green would take part of both names of his drummer and bass player and call the group Fleetwood Mac. It would start out being billed as Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac featuring Jeremy Spencer, but Peter put a stop to that. He just wanted the band called Fleetwood Mac. Their first 2 studio albums proved a success in the UK, and more was to follow with the release of the song Black Magic Woman and Albatross. But with the success also came the money and the drugs. In 1969, the group signed with Warner Brothers Records and recorded their 3rd studio album, They Play On, which prominently featured new 3rd guitarist and songwriter 18-year-old Danny Kirwan. Green had first seen Kirwan play in 1967 while he was playing with his blues trio Boiler House. Green was impressed with his playing and used the band as a support act for Fleetwood Mac before recruiting Kerwin to his own band at the suggestion of Mick Fleetwood. Around this time, Green's bandmates began to notice changes in his state of mind. He was taking large doses of LSD, grew his beard, and began to wear robes and a crucifix. Mick Fleetwood recalled Green becoming concerned about accumulating wealth. I had conversations with Peter Green because he was obsessed about money, wanting us to give it all away. Many think the tipping of the scales for Peter was in 1970 on a road trip to play a gig in Munich, Germany. This couple appeared at the airport, greeting the band like old friends, especially Peter. They ended up following Peter around for the rest of the day and went to watch the group's performance later that night. After the gig, this weird couple took Peter, along with guitarist Danny Kerwin, to a huge mansion, which they had turned into a hippie commune. Peter and Danny took some LSD and began jamming with members of the commune in the basement of this house. When Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, and Jeremy Spencer later arrived, they were met by their road manager, who had a worried look on his face. He warned them that Green was tripping out badly. They were soon to check out of their hotel and leave Munich. Now, although Peter Green had already started to show signs of mental illness, this particular incident was the one from which he never fully recovered. When asked about it later, Peter said, "I went on a trip and never came back." Well, the truth be known, he never came back because he kept dropping LSD, for one thing. A psychiatrist once said that there wasn't solid proof that taking LSD would bring on mental health issues, but in the same sentence, he said he sure didn't see how it helped it any. Toward the end with Fleetwood Mac, as I said earlier, he grew his beard out and started wearing white robes, and he expressed a disillusionment about fame and money, while his behavior on and off stage became increasingly erratic. After a May 1970 concert, he walked away from the band that he had started. He had been quoted as saying he expected one day to leave the band, and then went on to say, "They're my friends, I'm going to leave them with the name." And he did just that. Peter would release a solo album right after leaving the group titled The End of the Game. It was a very different style of album compared to the work he did with Fleetwood Mac. Instrumentals for the most part. Some people didn't like it. Some called it a masterpiece. For myself, it's art. It sounded to me like Peter Green's tortured mind crying out. If you've never heard this album, I'll leave you a YouTube link in the description box. Check it out and give me your thoughts on it. Sadly, that's about all we'd hear from him in the decade to come. He followed this album's release with 2 singles, one released in 1971 and one in 1972. But Green's solo career was then put on hold because of his faltering mental state. He did make another appearance with Fleetwood Mac. He was called in sometime in February or March of 1971 to finish a tour after guitarist Jeremy Spencer had left the group. He performed under the name Peter Blue. Around this time, Peter was trying to record a second solo album, but it just didn't materialize. The drugs and mental illness had just become too much for him. As time moved on and treatment for mental disorders advanced, Peter seemed to get a bit better. In the 1990s, he went on to form the Peter Green Splinter Group. They recorded some albums during their time together. One was the Robert Johnson Songbook. The album was cover versions of every song Robert Johnson was known to have recorded, but it seemed his guitar playing lacked the intensity of his days. This was probably due to the medication he was on. Regardless of the cause, Green was irreversibly changed. In the 2009 documentary, his former manager Clifford Davis describes feeling heartbroken when he shared a meal with an unkept Green, who had inches-long fingernails and ate with his hands. His longtime bandmate, friend, and co-founder Mick Fleetwood says, "It's not about the long fingernails and being lost. I need that to be made very clear. It's about the respect for what this person and the band at the time represented." Sometime in around 2003 or so, Mick Fleetwood, who had kept in touch with Peter Green through the years, had talked him into a return. Peter had agreed to play a concert with him, but sadly, at the last minute, he canceled out. I didn't often know how his mind worked, and I felt let down, Mick said. I realized I needed to let it go. It's painful, but it pays no dividends to you or the person you're trying to hang on to. But time has a way. In February of 2020, 6 months before the death of Peter Green, Mick enlisted an all-star cast for a one-of-a-kind concert at the London Palladium, honoring the early years of Fleetwood Mac and his founder, Peter Green. Although he didn't attend, this was a great honor to him and his music. During the show, Kirk Hammett played Peter's '59 Les Paul, which he now owns, on the Green Manalishi. Peter Green died in his sleep July 25th of 2020. He was worth £4.5 million at the time of his death. In his will, he left 3/4 of it to his brothers and sister, and 1/4 of it to his daughter Rose from his short marriage to Jane Samuels in 1978, on the condition she could prove she was his daughter. Why? Who knows what went on in the mind of Peter Green. Peter wrote, produced, and recorded some of those great early Fleetwood Mac songs like Albatross, Man of the World, and many more. Paranoia, schizophrenia, and numerous LSD trips took away what I consider one of the best guitar players the UK ever produced. And there you have it, Peter Green. What a guitar player. What's up, everybody? Thanks for stopping in. I want to remind y'all, anybody here, if you haven't subscribed to the River Docs channel, do so. Catch up on some new docs. Catch our live show, which usually goes on 8 o'clock Eastern Time on Sunday evenings. I see a bunch of you there, but I got to get another video started so I get these done so I can get to my 8 o'clock appointment. Now, the next gentleman I want to honor on Memorial Weekend was probably one of the most, charismatic guitar players of the 70s and into the 80s. And the band sold millions of albums. He was just a great player, and his death came a little too early. So, without further ado, let's take and remember the great Gary Richrath. So let's try and understand what it is like to make that long climb to the top with your fellow bandmates who you worked so hard for so many years with to get there, and then turn around one day and realize that the top of the world you were just sitting on did a flip, and now you have to look up to see where you once was. When the realization hits that that part of your life is over, and odds are great it will never return, it can be tough to accept. There's not much doubt that it was very hard for Gary Richrath, as it was for all the band members at that time. They all handled it in different ways. Some did good, some not so good. I guess you could say Gary Richrath was the story of a hometown boy who became a rock star. Even though it didn't have the happy ending for Gary the way he probably dreamed it would, or maybe he never thought it would end, or just didn't want to think about it. But no matter how this story ended for him, there was a time when Gary Richrath was a rock star, especially throughout the Midwest. He was the face of REO Speedwagon. He was also the one who molded them into a rock and roll band early on, wrote some of their most iconic songs, and helped lead them on and off stage. He was there through the 70s and 80s, but as the 80s wound down, everything started to change. The band members were getting older, and rock and roll music wasn't what it used to be. I think Gary had a lot of trouble with those changes, more trouble than many people realize. Back in 1970, Gary Richrath was just what keyboardist Neil Daugherty and drummer Alan Gratzer needed for their band. When the two founding members first heard a young Gary play, they liked his licks. He had a rock star look and could really play the guitar, Neil said. At this time, the group was just a cover band. But Gary, besides having rock star looks and playing the guitar, also wrote and wanted to play original songs. And Gary wanted to be in their band just as much as they wanted him. Then in 1972, Kevin Cronin replaced lead singer Terry Luttrell. Kevin was there for about a year and was replaced by Mike Murphy. And then, in 1976, Cronin was back for good, taking over from Murphy. The band felt they were heading in the right direction to take the next step, but there was one more move to be made. Greg Philbin had been the bass player since 1968, but for some reason the band wasn't happy with his playing style and made a change in 1977, hiring Bruce Hall, saying they liked the way Bruce stayed in with the drummer. I guess this could be true. I've read that Kevin and Gary had been friends with Bruce for a long time. And when you listen to the You Get What You Play For live album, which was Greg's last, he sounds in the pocket to me. But I really don't know. Could have been his playing or a personality conflict, maybe a little both. But either way, he was out and Bruce was in. And the next album, Bruce's first with the band, was to be their biggest seller up to that time, titled You Can Tune a Piano, But You Can't Tune a Fish. This lineup would stay the same for almost a dozen years, and it would be the one that would take REO Speedwagon to the top during the late 70s and into the early 80s. The album High Infidelity was released in the winter of 1980. The album became a big hit in the United States, peaking at number 1 on Billboard's 200. It would end up selling over 10 million copies and produce 6 singles. Now I say this tongue-in-cheek, but it had a little help too. MTV debuted just after midnight on August 1st, 1981. REO Speedwagon was to have 8 videos on MTV in the first 24 hours that the channel was on the air. Later that same week, REO Speedwagon's sold-out show in Denver, Colorado, became the first live stereo concert broadcast on MTV. Most all rock and roll fans throughout the Midwest knew who REO Speedwagon was, but now rock fans from New York to Los Angeles knew also. The band was on top of the world at this point of their career. Reaching the top is hard, but it's even harder and way more stressful to stay there. Gary and Kevin Cronin had found the groove as far as songwriting. Considering there are 2 different styles, they got the most out of what they did. With the High Infidelity album, and especially the 2 top singles from it, Take It on the Run and Keep on Loving You, they walked a fine line between pop and rock and roll. If you were to take away Gary's guitar from those 2 songs, they would sound very different, more on the popular side of music than rock and roll. So for the follow-up album after High Infidelity, one titled Good Trouble, they leaned back toward rock a little more. But naturally, the album wasn't going to come even close to High Infidelity. Then the album after Good Trouble, titled Wheels Are Turning, did a little better, but not much. If you look back, REO released an album a year starting in 1971 all the way up to High Infidelity in 1980. After that, it took them 4 years to release the next 2 albums, Good Trouble in '82 and Wheels Are Turning in '84. And it would take 3 more years before they released the final album with all 5 members, called Life as We Know It, in 1987. Album sales were declining rapidly, and it seemed the music scene was passing them by, especially if they wanted to stick to their roots and stay rock and roll, which of course Gary Richrath did. I think drummer and founding member Alan Gratzer saw the writing on the wall first. After 21 years with the band, he left around the end of 1988 and went home to spend time with his family and start a second chapter in his life. We started out just to have fun, but it took over our lives, he said. We made 16 albums and sold 40 million copies and got to see the world. Alan was 40 years old at this time. When Alan made the final decision to leave, bassist Bruce Hall, keyboardist and founding member Neil Daugherty, and singer Kevin Cronin took the news pretty well. They had known for some time how unhappy Alan was. But Gary Richrath was totally unprepared for Alan's decision and had the most emotional reaction. Alan said, "He just gave me a big hug and wouldn't let go." We both burst into tears. It was just one of those things where we'd been together for so long. This is really tough. I read where Kevin Cronin said about Alan leaving the group. I had no idea at the time how deeply or on how many levels Alan's departure would affect this group. Alan didn't just leave the group, he retired from music altogether, spent some time being a father and a husband, then started a restaurant business. The other 4 members were to go on with music. Now the band's run was over. There's no doubt about that. Rock music had changed. At the time Gary left in 1990, some of the top-selling albums were The Black Crowes' Shake Your Money Maker, Cinderella, Heartbreak Station, and AC/DC's The Razor's Edge. So you get the idea of what rock music was in 1990. And this is where the problem came in. Gary wanted to go in one direction musically, and the remaining 3 members wanted to go in another. But in all honesty here, and this is just my opinion, either direction they would have went in was not going to save REO Speedwagon. They couldn't have done the music to move forward into the 90s even if they wanted to. The music that Gary and Kevin wrote was great for its time, but sadly, that ship had sailed on. It happens to all bands. So Gary left and put his own group together and started playing gigs. And Kevin, Neil, and Bruce decided to get replacements for Alan and Gary, which they did and recorded an album. Their label, Epic, released it. It flopped, and Epic dropped them from the label after almost 20 years. Now, if you think this record flopped because Gary and Alan were gone, maybe, but I don't buy it. Gary went on to release his own album a few years later, and although I love the album, as it kind of reminded me of old REO, it flopped worse than the one that REO released. The part that REO Speedwagon was over could only be seen by Alan Gratzer. He got out while the getting was good and invested his money and moved on with his life at 40. Kevin, Neil, and Bruce went after the band name. They knew if they were to keep playing, even doing shows of their old hits, that band name was worth money. Gary went off on his own name, Richrath. The band was playing bars and opening shows around the Midwest. There wasn't much money coming in doing that. I saw Gary and his band Richrath a few times during the 90s, and they were good. But they were now a bar band trying to get opening gigs. They were selling and promoting the album off stage. I will say this for Gary, even though this was a far cry from his REO Speedwagon days, he still gave it everything. And what people were there crowded around the stage on his side to watch him play. Kevin, Neil, and Bruce took the band name and did what basically every rock band whose time had come did. They started touring and became kind of a tribute band with their old hits. The band name REO Speedwagon carried some weight, and they could sell out small venues playing those old hits. And I guess down the road, they could have done a reunion tour and made more money, and there was talk about it happening, but it never materialized. Alan was happy in his retirement, and Gary, although he wanted to do it, really wasn't able to. Even a rock star needs to know when it's time to shut it down and take care of yourself, and Gary just couldn't. He couldn't let go of the past and move on. As I said, he had a hard time with the breakup and coming off that pinnacle that REO rode back when they were all young rock stars. Hope you enjoyed this video. Yes, I hope you did. I hope you enjoyed the video. Yes, I do. Yeah, they were, Chloe. They were very iconic. And Gary was a very iconic guitar player and he deserves his memory to be kept alive. Riding the Storm Out, what a great song. Well, I've got one more video to show, and then I'm going to have to shut this one down. I'm going to have to shut it down and go over to my other one and see if I can get it going. Y'all can follow me over there if you'd like to. And don't forget, if you haven't subscribed, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel. I think you'll like it if you like these kind of videos and things. And also, our live stream on Sunday night. It's kind of fun. We have a good time. You can follow us over there. It's linked up on the channel now, so if you subscribe, you'll see it. But I'm going to show one more video from Memorial Weekend. Yes, we are. We're going to get one more going here, and I'm going to look for it. And this is a guitarist that died entirely too young. Entirely. He was a fantastic guitar player. I don't know. It's hard to make a choice between Randy Rhoads and Tommy Bolin. Two of the youngest and best guitar players I believe I've ever saw. You know, they just, what can you say about them? A shame they didn't live longer. But here's our last video in this live stream, and this is Tommy Bolin. Tommy Bolin was a natural, a self-taught, driven by desire jazz fusion guitarist with influences in all genres of music. His composition, Ode to G, recorded with Deep Purple, was a tribute to George Gershwin. In short, Tommy Bolin was a fireball of energy and talent that could play any style of music he wanted to and do it with the best of them. He could also party with the best of them, and sadly, in the early morning hours of December 4th in 1967, at the young age of 25, in a hotel room in Miami, Florida, he died. Could his death have been prevented that night? And that's up for debate, and we'll do just that later on in the video. But first, let's take a look back on his life and musical journey, which includes 2 albums with the group Zephyr, 2 solo albums, a couple more albums with the James Gang, 4 songs on drummer Billy Cobham's debut album, Spectrum. He also replaced Ritchie Blackmore in Deep Purple and worked on an album with them while working on his own solo music at the time. For as short of a time as he was here, Tommy Bolin probably accomplished more than any guitarist I can think of. Tommy Richard Bolin was born in Sioux City, Iowa on August 1st, 1951. He started out at an early age with the piano and drums, but at age 10 he got his first guitar and he started his love affair with the instrument. After playing in a few small local bands, Tommy got a gig in a more professional act in 1964 with a group called Denny and the Triumphs. He was just 13 years old at the time. This just shows how good Tommy already was on the guitar. The band would later be renamed A Patch of Blue and were professional enough to land opening slots on shows with the likes of the Beach Boys, the Animals, and Herman's Hermits. Now during this time with the Patch of Blue, Tommy would also perform with a 3-piece group called the Chateaus. Tommy filled out the sound in this group, switching between guitar and Hammond organ. He would do this up until 1967, when he was let go by the Patch of Blue for playing too loud. Probably, in all honesty, Tommy had just outgrown the band. After that, he would be expelled from high school for refusing to cut his hair and move off to Boulder, Colorado, and found a gig playing in a band called American Standard in 1967. This was an important early step in Tommy's career, as it introduced him to the band singer Jeff Cook, who sang and co-wrote with Tommy in the following years. And it also put some money in his pocket, because soon American Standard became the house band at the Family Dog nightclub in Denver. There, Tommy would meet the nightclub's manager, Barry Fay. Later, he would become Tommy's manager for a time. In early 1968, American Standard broke up, and supposedly Tommy took off for Cincinnati and played a few gigs with Lonnie Mack, and then formed a group called the Ginger People with a keyboard player named John Ferris. This was when Tommy came back to Colorado along with John Ferris. They would stick together. This would mark the beginning of Tommy's first taste of the big time, as the pair would hook up with two musicians from Boulder who'd recently been in a band called Brown Sugar. Their names, Candy and David Givens, a husband and wife team, and they would pull together to form the group Zephyr. Tommy Bolin was 17 years old at this time. The band would put out 2 albums and hit the stage in a big way, opening for the likes of Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, and Jimi Hendrix. The band's self-titled first album was released in 1969. Recording it was not a very good experience. The production and the band, irritated by multiple takes, brought on a personnel change in May 1970 when drummer Robbie Chamberlain was asked to leave. The decision ultimately contributed to the band's breakup the following year. They would hire Tommy's friend Bob Berge to play drums, and although Tommy really liked his style, I don't think the other members were fond of it. They would release their second album with Berge on drums, titled Going Back to Colorado. And although this album was considered better than the debut album, the band just wasn't seeing eye to eye. It would end up with Tommy and Berge leaving to form the band Energy. It seemed like in the 70s, Tommy was playing with a new band every year after Zephyr. Energy in 72 and 73, and then he played with Billy Cobham in mid-1973. Then he jumped to the James Gang in August of 73 until around October of 74. Then he finally started working on his solo career. But when the opportunity to take over for Ritchie Blackmore and the group Deep Purple came along, he took that on in June of 1975, while keeping up working on his solo album. He kept up a very hectic pace the last 5 or 6 years of his life. It was during this time with Energy that Tommy's drug use started to escalate, and by the time he got in with the James Gang, he was getting way over the top with it. It would be the contributing factor in ending his life just a few short years later, which we'll discuss here shortly. The James Gang bass player said that Tommy had a horrible, unbelievable drug problem. But that wasn't the issue that caused his split with them. It had to do with the music. Tommy never was real fond of the rock bluesy style of music of the band, and after a couple of albums, he decided to start out on his solo career and work on his own style, the music he loved. Tommy was quoted saying, "I replaced Walsh and I replaced Blackmore. Now I just gotta be me." Well, that isn't exactly all true. Though he did replace Blackmore, Joe Walsh had already left the James Gang, and it was Dominic Troiano who had replaced Joe on guitar, and that didn't work too well for the band. So it was Dominic who Tommy actually replaced. Joe was out in Colorado at the time working on his album with his band Barnstorm. Right after leaving the James Gang, Tommy would do a little session work also, most notably with the Canadian band Moxie as lead guitarist on 6 songs from their debut album. Eventually, Tommy would sign a record deal with The Emperor Records as a solo artist, and he would begin recording his first album. Tommy used quite a few artists in making of this album, including David Sanborn, Stanley Sheldon, Jan Hammer, Glenn Hughes, Phil Collins, and many more. But as he was finishing it up, and at a time when he should be getting ready to go out and promote the album, he got the phone call about coming to work with Deep Purple. Although Tommy desperately wanted a solo career of his own, the money and status of playing with a huge act like Deep Purple was simply too much to pass up. Now remember, this was back in a time when getting out and touring to promote your album was extremely necessary for album sales. There was no MTV or internet, and although I'm sure the money and exposure was good for Tommy, it hurt his solo album sales. This album, called Teaser, is a great album. It shows off the broad range of styles in Tommy's playing. The material spans hard rock, blues rock, jazz, reggae, and Latin music, often blending these styles together within a single song. It's considered by many to be the greatest recordings of his short career. Tommy would work on one album with Deep Purple and begin working on his second and last album titled Private Eyes. But from the accounts of many, his drug abuse was out of control by now. He was dropped by the Emperor Records, and his longtime friend and manager Barry Fay was able to get Tommy signed with Columbia. His new label pushed hard to make him a headline act, but sadly no effort was made to address his obvious drug problem. They did work on getting him a more conventional rock album, which was an attempt by Columbia to get Tommy more FM radio play. It did accomplish that, as Post Toasties, Shake the Devil, and Bustin' Out for Rosie all became FM rock staples. But Tommy was out of control. There are so many stories of him falling off stage, not being coherent enough to play a show, passing out before and after shows. To be brutally honest, he was just a mess. His death came as not a shock to many who knew him. Could his death have been prevented that night? Sure, it could have, but the ones hired to take care of him had to worry more about Tommy's career and the bad publicity that calling an ambulance and getting him to the hospital would bring than worrying about his life. And that's not an uncommon thing back then. Keith Richards survived many of them. There's no telling how many times Elvis Presley's bodyguards and girlfriends brought him back before he finally did himself in. December 3rd, 1976, Tommy Bolin's band opened for Jeff Beck at a show in Miami, Florida. Everyone at the show remembers his performance was inspired, and Tommy closed his set with a rousing performance of Post Toasties. After the show, at the Newport Hotel, around 2 in the morning, while talking on the phone, Tommy suddenly collapsed. A friend there with him called the room of his bodyguard, L.C. Clayton, for help. L.C., Tommy's guitar tech, a roadie, and Tommy's current girlfriend ran down to his room. They threw Tommy in the shower to bring him back around. His bodyguard asked his friend, who was there with him, what drugs he had done, and the friend said he'd run up some heroin. He later changed the story that Tommy had just snorted it. Tommy had also been drinking earlier in the hotel bar, and probably during, before, and after his show. It didn't take them too long working on Tommy in the shower, and he started coming back around, and the color returned to his face, so they put him to bed. About an hour later, his guitar tech called the emergency hotel number and spoke to the hotel doctor and said Tommy had taken Valium and had been drinking, and that they couldn't wake him up. The doctor told him they needed to get him to the hospital or he could possibly die. Around this time, Tommy came to and mumbled something. So to his guitar tech, he seemed to be coming around and okay. So sadly, a call was never placed to summons an ambulance at that time. And a few hours later, they all left the room, leaving Tommy in the care of his girlfriend, who would call the ambulance early the next morning after his pulse rate dropped. The ambulance arrived, but Tommy Bolin, at the age of 25, was dead by the time they got there. The cause of death was an overdose of heroin, although the medical examiner's report showed that he had ingested a lethal cocktail of drugs consisting of cocaine, barbiturates, and alcohol. As I said, his death could probably have been prevented that night had they called the ambulance sooner and maybe saved Tommy's life at that time. But had he lived, would he have woke up and saved himself from himself? That we'll never know. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around, watching a few videos with me, and remembering some great guitarists on this Memorial Weekend. I have to run. I don't have a lot of time here. As you all know, here I am. But I'll be over on the other live stream here, and I'm going to try to get there right at 8 o'clock, which gives me about 5 minutes to run around and do I don't know. I got to do a few little things here, but I got 5 minutes. Thank you all for stopping by. Anybody that's new here, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe. Come on over and check out the live stream that's coming up. Look at some documentary videos. There's 140 documentaries on the channel. I got to run. You take care. I'll see you all on the other side.